The Cowboys' new defensive coordinator, Christian Parker, is very close to finalizing his staff. We're seeing it take shape. And I got some thoughts, Cowboys Nation. And I want to discuss Schotty because I think his influence in this situation could potentially resonate beyond maybe his tenure or even Christian Parker's tenure. So make sure y'all stick around for that.
I want you to put the word out there. We back up. Understand me?
Okay, you may have heard me say this a number of different times over the last 5 years if you've been tuning into the show, but the Cowboys don't just have a defensive coordinator problem. The Cowboys have a philosophical problem. Yeah. Now we can talk about how one of the main issues with this organization is the top down in general, but let's just stick to the defensive side. And when you look at this, you see so many defensive coordinators over the last 15 years. And yes, a lot of these guys did not work out. A lot of these guys were bad when they were here. But I think the biggest issue was that not only did you change coordinators, but you kept changing philosophies. You had no real foundation. And I've said this for so long. When you go look at the history of some really good organizations defensively that have had defenses that have been solid for a very consistent amount of time or period of time, you think about them and you say, well, at least I do, they are going to do this specific thing. They're going to draft this specific way. They're going to sign these type of free agents. They're going to run their defense like this. Think about the Steelers, about the New England Patriots, the Baltimore Ravens, Philly, two different times really with Philly, Jim Johnson era and then post Jim Johnson, Denver, Seattle in the infancy stages of when they had the LOB and then post LOB days, Tampa Bay, right? Tampa 2 for so long. It's a philosophy that stuck and that resonated from the top down. And when you look at this graphic here, you don't see that. You see 3-4, then you see 4-3, then you see 4-3 over, then back to 3-4, and then multiple, and then 4-3 again, and then zone. It's just so many drastically different ways that the Cowboys have attacked their defensive philosophy. And I don't even want to say they attacked it. They kind of just throw things at the wall. And one of my main problems with doing that is when you go to draft and when you sign these free agents and things like that, there's no true carryover to getting the best out of that player because they may not fit the next scheme or the next philosophy. So for a few years now, I've been kind of begging not just continuity with the defensive coordinator, but continuity with a vision, right? And that's where I think Schotty comes into play. I was thinking about this for a while now, especially since Schotty was at the press conference and he talked about what he wanted in a defensive coordinator. And by the way, I think he got that with Christian Parker. I really do. I think he matches everything that Schottenheimer wants on the offense side of the ball. He does it for the defensive side of the ball. And that's kind of where I want to start. What does Schotty want on the defensive side of the ball? There's no doubt. He did not pick Matt Eberflus. I don't care what the Joneses or Jerry is trying to say at the podium in that presser after they fired Matt Eberflus in that, well, I wouldn't have made the decision if Schotty. Okay, sure, pal. Well, just go look at this graphic once again and go look at the process in getting the Mike Nolans and getting the Zimmers and getting the Dans and getting the Matt Eberfluses, and then go look at the process in what Schotty just did this past offseason in hiring Christian Parker. I'm no fool. That was all Schottenheimer these last few weeks or months. Last year was not. So when you do that, you essentially start a division within the organization, in my opinion. You have, all right, I'm an offensive coordinator or offensive head coach. I'm running the offense. Here's the defense. And I think that's what the Joneses wanted. I do. I think when you go look at the press, I don't know, call it press conference, the interview, I think it was with Jerry Jones. I think it was Senior Bowl a few years ago. And he had talked about how he believed the Cowboys had 2 head coaches on the team. One of the craziest things that you can actually say. But he said he believes the Cowboys have 2 head coaches in Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn. You don't want that. You want this organization, you want the coaching staff, you want the players, you want everything about the team to be one. And I think that starts with having the head coach be able to control what he wants from top down. Now, sometimes you may run into a situation where it doesn't work out, right? Where Mike McCarthy hired his guy and Nolan, and it didn't work out. But you don't just stop there. So I think what happened here, the Joneses hired Dan Quinn, and the Joneses said, it worked out. Let's do it again. They realized, whoops, that didn't work out. And they let Schotty take the reins, and here we are with Christian Parker. But I say all that to say, when I go look at offensive head coaches right now, guys that have been very successful in their tenure, Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay. I've brought this up before on the collective. Shout out to my guys. I might have brought it up here on the channel too. But when you actually go look at Kyle Shanahan, he has a defensive philosophy, even as an offensive coordinator or offensive-minded guy. He has a specific way he wants his defense to look, to run, and who to run it with. Hence why he got rid of a defensive coordinator 1 year after taking them to the Super Bowl, because he didn't run it the way he wanted it ran. Brings Robert Saleh back in. They're right back in the playoffs. Sean McVay, same way in a sense. Sean McVay has a specific type of defense he wanted to run. Hired Brandon Staley to come in and run Fangio stuff. Brandon Staley moved on, brought in Raheem Morris. He didn't run the exact thing, but he tweaked it, but kept the same ideology. Same thing with now Chris Shula in LA. They're not changing the foundation of who they are. They're tweaking it to get better year in year. That way, when you sign these free agents, when you draft these guys, they can seamlessly transition into what you want to do. Just take a look at the Cowboys in yesteryear. The last time the Cowboys had, I'll call it this, last time the Cowboys had a consistently solid defense for a good period of time. I'm not going to call it great. I'm not going to call it, earth shattering, because once you get to the playoffs, it never transitioned that way. But I'm just talking about consistency from a philosophical standpoint and some success in a way. It was when they brought in Bill Parcells. Back in 2003, Parcells said, we are flipping the script. We're going to move to a more 3-4 look. And at the time, it was a real 3-4. They went out and got some 3-4 guys on the defensive line. Same thing, the second level. When Parcells moved on, who did they hire? Wade Phillips. That way, guys like DeMarcus Ware and Jay Ratliff, Anthony Spencer can all seamlessly transition in, because it's the same philosophical concept as a Bill Parcells, and they had some success during that time defensively. Next year, or the next transition, was Rob Ryan. Didn't work out, but they kept that way. Some of these guys can seamlessly fit, but then we start seeing the deterioration of, I think, the personnel, etc. And then they said, okay, we did about 10 years with that. Let's flip it. They went back to 4-3, then 3-4, then multiple, then 4, and they just kept going back and forth. But that Bill Parcells to Wade Phillips era lasted about 10 years of a similar philosophy, if you will. But you really have to, I think, hone in on that as an organization. If you want to drastically shift, then you have to say, okay, this is what we're going to do for this period of time. You have to have a vision. And that's what I believe Schottenheimer has with Christian Parker. So Parker has hired 4 new assistants on his staff, and that's as the date right now. There could be more as we are discussing some of this. So let's kind of take a look at these guys and again, discuss why this could resonate beyond even Christian Parker's tenure or maybe even Schottenheimer's tenure. Hope not. We want Schotty here for the long term. But if things don't work out, again, you don't want to continue to keep having a snap. But let's take a look at this staff. So Christian Parker first hired cornerbacks coach out of Arizona, by way of Arizona, in Ryan Smith. Very young, 32-year-old, sharp, up-and-coming coach. He's going to come here to coach these cornerbacks and help in regards to assisting Derek Ansley, who was the pass game coordinator, who had the same title with the Green Bay Packers. Ansley's about, I believe, 47-ish. He's been around a bit. He coached with Nick Saban. So they have some similar philosophy or ideologies that kind of match in what some of the things that Parker wants to do. He was the de facto defensive coordinator in 2023 under Staley. I say de facto because Staley ran that defense. Ansley did not. He also had spent some time in, almost at Oakland, but with the Raiders. They also hired Marcus Dixon, defensive line coach for the Vikings, also former Dallas Cowboy for a few years back in the 2008, 2009 era. And Marcus Dixon has a really awesome story overcoming wrongful convictions to turn it into what is a rising coaching career in the NFL. And look, I know a lot of people don't like, hey, this is my friend is what they call it, or this is my guy I coach with, but that's very common in the NFL. You're going to bring on guys that you trust, that you've had some connection with at some point. That doesn't mean you dismiss other guys that you may have not coached with. But Marcus Dixon is a guy that has coached with Christian Parker in Denver. Now, he was a defensive line coach when Parker was coaching the cornerbacks and the defensive backs at that period of time. And then they just recently hired outside linebackers coach out of Georgia, Chidera Uzo Duribe. Hopefully I did not botch his name. And he's going to take on the same role here in Dallas. And what I find interesting about all of these coordinate or all these assistant hires, but not just that, but the process in which getting there, is that you can tell right away we're going to have a philosophical shift with this defense, schematically at the very least. I think this is going to be a odd front defense, right? And I think you can take that away by A, the guys they were interviewing for the coordinator job, and B, the guy they hired. Christian Parker has notoriously been in odd front 3-4 type of defenses with Vance Joseph and Vic Fangio of late. And then the outside linebacker coaches they were interviewing, right? That indicates we're going to get some odd front stand-up rusher type guys. And then they I want to say that. Then they hired an up-and-coming rising coach in Uzo Duribe out of Georgia. You hear nothing but really good things with these guys, specifically him. And he's another guy, just like Christian Parker years ago, where they said, this guy's going to be a defensive coordinator someday. This guy's going to be a head coach someday. A lot of young, fresh, but also experience in Dixon and Ansley, a good mix, right? Again, kind of reminds me of what Schotty did on the other side of the ball. You know, bringing in some experience in the sense of Clayton Adams had been here in the NFL, a little bit in college, but also going straight to the college ranks, getting Junior Adams, getting Connor Riley on his staff. It matches what he wants to do. But I circle back to the top of this thing. You got to have a foundation you can build on for years. You have to have a philosophy you can stand on, even beyond the current coordinator or possibly current head coach. Possibly. You really want the head coach to stay and put as long as possible. But you don't want to have to keep snapping coordinators and they changing schemes, right? And you hope that Christian Parker someday moves on, not because you fired him, but because he did so damn good here in Dallas that another team wants to hire him as their head coach. So when that happens, do you have a farm system? I'm going to use a baseball term here, and you've heard me use it before on this channel. You probably heard me use it on the collective as well. Do you have a farm system where you can say, all right, bet, we moved on from our defensive coordinator, or our defensive coordinator has moved on, but we've got a couple guys that we believe can take over. When I go look at this, I don't believe that ever was the case except for one time, right? And that was the Dan Quinn time frame where he had Al Harris under him. He had the former defensive coordinator, Joe Witt, for the Washington football people. that was the potential time to be able to do something like that, where you didn't have to drastically change your philosophy because those guys have been here under it and have had some success under. Now, I know Joe Witt's name may be tarnished a bit because of his time in Washington. Well, last year, I was just saying Washington. But here in Dallas, he along with Al Harris, helped, turn around that secondary. But if you go look, I don't think that ever was the case prior to Quinn, and obviously wasn't the case under Zimmer or Matt Eberflus. Hell, Zimmer, I thought the Zimmer hire was the Zimmer administration. I didn't even call it the administration. That 2024 year was just doomed to fail because it was a lame duck season by bringing back Mike McCarthy. When you do that, you are putting so much pressure on that defensive coordinator who may not be here beyond 2024 because of the head coach. And then you brought in a 60-something-year-old guy who probably wanted to be a head coach, and you were never going to make him a head coach. Just kind of a recipe for disaster, if you will. And then you bring in Matt Eberflus. Matt Eberflus brought his guys. And if you go really look at his guys respectfully, those were, I'm trying to be respectful. Those were more so his minions, if you will, right? Like they followed him for the last 3 different places he's been. And if you really dive deep, never were guys that you say, hey man, this guy is a savant. He's the next defensive coordinator. He's the next head coach. They were, and sometimes you need a group of dudes who know what you want to do and can implement it that way. I get it. Like there's some great coordinators that, hell, Bill Parcells brought Bill Belichick everywhere. Now he's amazing, but he went from New York to the Jets, the Patriots, Jets, and then Bill finally did his own thing. Bill Belichick, that is. So hey, shouts out to Eberflus and his guys. That you're gonna do what you're gonna do. But in regards to Parker, he doesn't have his guys just yet. He has not built a tree. He's not built a farm system, a faction, if you will. That is what we're potentially about to see and hopefully about to see is Parker's staff developing into guys that could potentially take over one day in Dallas. Something that they have not had here for a very long time. I don't want to put this in the air, but I'm going to do it. If something were to not work out with the current head coach in Schotty, but you're seeing progression on the other side of the ball, that is another way to keep that continuity is to take that rising guy in a Christian Parker and elevate him into the head coaching position. And then how do you keep that continuity on that side of the ball? Hey, Uzo, you're the next defensive coordinator. Marcus Dixon, you're the next defensive. Ryan Smith, right? You keep these guys here. But we don't want it that way. We want Schotty to have so much success that the next defensive coordinator is a guy under Christian Parker. So those are some of my thoughts. And these are thoughts that I've been having for many years, right? If you've been following this channel, is that, man, the Cowboys have got to stop snapping when it comes to the defensive side of the ball. They have to stand on business. They have to decide what they want to be, how they want to be it, and stick to that through thick or thin. Fortunately, they're not sticking through an Eberflus vision. Now we're going to hopefully stick through a very sharp, young, good up-and-coming coach in Christian Parker. And I think a lot of that is the influence of Brian Schottenheimer. I don't think this gets done without him being able to win that room over with Jerry Jones, because we know that he is very keen on who he wants to hire and comfortability and who he knows. There is not a shadow of a doubt he knew a single soul that was potentially interviewed, hired, or thought of in regards to Schotty and what he wanted to do on the defensive side of the ball. That's why I believe this was all Schotty. I don't think it had anything to do with Jerry. If it did, you'd see Ron Rivera as a defensive coordinator in 2026. You see Leslie Frazier as a defensive coordinator in 2026. Instead, you got a young up-and-coming brother in Christian Parker. I tell you one thing, Cookout's finna be lit. Cookouts better be lit. That's my time, Cowboys Nation. I will catch y'all again. Appreciate y'all for rocking with me. Peace.
Sleeper is the #1 fantasy sports app. It pays to know sports. Pick more or less on top players. Your first pick is on us, so start winning now. Play in Texas, Georgia, Minnesota, and 27 more states. Pick anytime across all sports, pregame or live. Over 10 million players are already on Sleeper. Make your picks count. Score up to 1,000 times your cash. Join today. Get up to $100 credit using code STEAL. Call your shot on Sleeper. Download now.